apologies for the delay. This relates, it's an additional public comment, and it is an objection to the application. It refers to the fact that a site meeting should have taken place in winter months, when the views of the site would have been different, and the full impact of the New Zealand method of farming would have been seen, and also to the type of farming which is being proposed, and also to the concerns over the dairy production figures that have been put forward, and relating to the views of the council's ecology officer regarding the herd size, and this was circulated to members yesterday. So moving on to the plans, the location of the site is edged in red. You'll see it includes the access track leading to the site of the milking parlour, and also the separate square area is the site of the dirty water lagoon. Next slide, please. Members visited the site this morning and viewed the site in context. It's a retrospective application, so the building and the lagoon have already been constructed, as has the collecting yard and the feed bin, as shown. An agricultural building on this site was previously consented by the council, and if we move on to the next slide, you'll see this is what was consented under the agricultural permitted development prior notification procedure. So that's the consented building. That was consented for a agricultural storage building. What is being constructed on site is a building of a slightly smaller footprint but slightly higher in size building for a milking parlour, and doesn't conform to the permitted development regulations, and hence the current application before you. Next slide, please. This shows the floor plan and the elevations of the milking parlour. Next slide. And this is the dirty water lagoon, which is excavated below ground levels, and the excavated material has been used to form a bund around the perimeter of the lagoon. Next slide. These are some of the photographs of the site. You see the position of the milking parlour, as shown by the arrow, reasonably close to the existing farm buildings, farmstead. Next slide. Again, the dark green cladding of the building and the feed bin. Next slide. This is the dirty water lagoon, and you see the grassed earth bank around the perimeter. Next slide. Next slide. And this is the milking parlour in the foreground, with the existing or pre-existing buildings in the background. This is the some of the cattle tracks shown. Next slide. Yeah, there we go. Bit of a delay. Yeah, this is a little parlour from a footpath to the side of the farm. Next one. And this is the yard adjacent to the milking parlour. Next one, and then this is just a view from further afield to show the building in context of the rest of the farm and the farmhouse. So, in terms of the main issues, the previous objection raised by the just whilst we're on that slide, this is the location of ancient woodland closest to the site. So the previous objection from the ecology team regarding the impacts from ammonia and potential pollution from the dirty water lagoon have now been addressed. The deterioration or the loss of the ancient woodland in the area through increased ammonia concentrations is considered to be unlikely. The ecology team have said that although the proposal would increase nitrogen deposition at 4 woodland sites, this can be counteracted through planting of a 10 metres wide tree planting buffer and a requirement for the lagoon to be covered. And this is included in one of the planning conditions recommended in the report. There is a pollution pathway from the slurry lagoon to the River Clun SAC, Special Area of Conservation. The design of the lagoon is controlled under other regulations, and the council's ecology team have completed the required habitats regulations assessment, which confirms that the proposal would not adversely affect the integrity of the River Clun SAC. There are objections from the parish council and local objections, which are set out in 4.1 and 4.2 of the committee report. I'll go through these various ones. In terms of the retrospective nature of the application, we're required to deal with the application as if it had not already been constructed, and we're required to look at the application in the same way. In terms of visibility, the report does recognise that the site is within the AONB. Officers consider that the dark green cladding with the existing trees and hedges of the recent planting, which will develop over time, and the opportunities for new landscape planting would help to blend the building within the landscape and the AONB, such that its special qualities would not be adversely affected. In terms of traffic movements, the council's highways team consider that traffic levels associated with the proposals will be in line with alternative farming systems that could be undertaken at the farm, and they do not consider that objection on highway safety grounds could sustain its appeal. In terms of other matters relating to grazing and the like, these relate to the farming systems and methods, and these are largely outside of planning control. In summary, planning policies do provide support for agricultural development. The site is in close proximity to the existing farm buildings. The location is sufficiently distant from the nearest dwellings, and the scale and the form is considered to be acceptable. Therefore, it's recommended that retrospective planning permission is granted subject to those conditions, to include a tree planting scheme and a requirement for the lagoon to be covered to minimise ammonia emissions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Kelvin. So we now have 2 speakers on this matter. So first over to David Evans, who I'm pretty sure he knows how much time he has. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. After visiting the site this morning at Tadimore, I feel that we should be supporting diversification on farming. The building has been well constructed. The lagoon is set away from other people and stuck behind farm buildings. I understand that ecology is now supporting this application, and with robust tree planting and a decent landscape and conditions imposed by the officers, I fully support this application. It fits in the NEONV quite well. The colouring is right, everything is right, and it's tidy, and with everything going forward for it, I think it's well worth supporting through the farming industry. So therefore, I now leave the room. Thank you.
Thank you. And our second speaker now, speaking for the application, is Sean Jones, agent. Sean, you have 3 minutes.
Good afternoon, members, and thank you for your time. This application is for a small livestock proposal. It's a smaller building footprint than the original approval. The farm enterprise is a low stocking rate dairy farm. The material within this application has been in the public domain for circa 12 months, so it's been very well ahead, and all the issues have been brought to the attention of the planning officer and the other consultees accordingly, and they've had a lot of time to present their information, which we've worked our way through, and provided supplementary information as necessary. As just explained a few minutes ago, there's been a big focus on ecology here and ammonia, and we've presented information, and the recommended mitigation is a cover on the dirty water lagoon and some tree planting, which the applicant is content with. It's a small building by the existing farmyard, and I believe the photographs which have been presented and on the screen a few minutes ago illustrate a very minimal visual impact overall. It's been considered by the officer as being policy compliant, and all the issues have been addressed. A number of planning conditions have been recommended, which we're content with. I encourage you to support this application, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any members or officers have any questions for speakers before we go to debate? No. Kim, you okay? Okay, then I open it to members for debate. Thank you. Councillor Tyndall.
Thank you. I have rather retrospectively given my apologies for not attending the site visit this morning. But as some of you will know, this has been my profession as a land agent for 50 years now, and I fully support this application. I can see no problem. I'm sorry about the juniper green. As you all know, I much prefer raven, but that's a personal feeling. I'm not going to suggest that the colour of the cladding is changed, as the application is partly retrospective. So I'm very happy to propose acceptance of the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Harding.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Interesting site visit this morning. I was a little bit concerned, I think, as a lot of people often are, in terms of retrospective planning applications, but I think that was my mind was put at rest when we were on site. It was clearly a smaller building than the one that was originally given the development rights, but the building seems to be constructed well. It fits in well with the landscape. It doesn't appear to be obviously viewable from any obvious vantage point that I can see, apart from the hill above. It fits in well with the farm building itself, so I'm quite happy to second the proposal from Robert.
Okay, thank you. Any other members want to make any? Oh, sorry, Councillor Marshall.
Yeah, thank you, Vice Chair. I think it is important for us to support our farmers, especially give them the opportunity with diversification in the markets that are available. I looked at the photographs and I absolutely agree. It blends in well with the planting that's going to go on, the covering of the lagoon. I will be supporting this application equally.
Thank you. Councillor Parsons.
Yes, I obviously didn't attend the site visit this morning, but I take account of what my colleagues have said that did, and that this does appear to fit in with the environment. I'd just be slightly concerned because of the history on this site of the conditions and that we wish to impose, and just to make sure that those conditions are met. And I heard the agent say that he was happy with the conditions that were proposed, so I'm assuming that the conditions will be met, and on that basis I'm prepared to support this as well.
Councillor Lee.
Yes, having attended the site visit this morning, I don't have any problems with this planning application. Whilst the height of the building is a bit higher than was originally proposed, I think it fits in well with the natural environment and with the tree planting scheme. I don't think it's going to have any detrimental impact on the landscape, so I'm happy to support it.
Thank you. Officers, do you want to come back on any of the comments made? No. Tim? No. Thank you. Well, we have a proposer and a seconder. I assume that this is to grant permission subject to the conditions set out as in Appendix 1. I presume that's part of the proposal. Thank you. So therefore proposer and seconder, so we then go to the vote.
Okay.
Doing it individually.
Individually.
Yeah.
So we've got a recommendation to grant permission subject to the conditions set out in Appendix 1. If I could just read out each councillor's name and you could indicate whether you're voting for or against the proposal. Caroline Bagnall. For. Andy Boddington. For. Nigel Harton.
For.
Christian Lee.
For.
Richard Marshall.
For.
Tony Parsons.
For.
Robert Tyndall.
For.
And Nick Hignett.
For.
Okay, that's unanimous for to accept the proposal recommendation.
Thank you. Now do we need to get councillors Love back in? She's speaking on the next item, or yeah, we do.
Come back in for the cycle. You'll pay your own.
As quick as that.
You know what that is.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, so it's me again for this one, and item 6 on the agenda, new dwelling, Seed House adjacent to Lands, Hasler Road, Church Stretton. So I go to officer now to give their presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. This is an application for the erection of a detached outbuilding within the grounds of a new dwelling at Hasler Road, Church Stretton. The area of land in which the new dwelling has been permitted is edged in red, and this includes the site for the proposed garage as well. Members visited the site this morning and went on to the property to view the location of the garage and other aspects of the site. As you can see, it's within a residential area of Church Stretton, which includes the surrounding land. Next slide, please. So the location of the proposed outbuilding is the rectangular dark shape to the north of the site, as shown, where you see the proposed access in from the highway to the north and the entrance gates opening inwards from the highway. And you'll also see that the garage is positioned over the part of the root protection area of one of the trees, as shown as well, the smaller tree. The next slide, please. So this is the approved plan that was approved as part of the planning permission for the dwelling. As you can see, there is no garage proposed at that time, and the access gates were different to now proposed. You can see there the access width is slightly smaller, and there is a small hedgerow as well on the very southeast bottom of the site there. You can see, if you can now go back a slide to the, you can see that the access proposed is now wider. That small piece of hedgerow has now been removed, and then you can see that the proposed garage is being situated as shown. Next slide, or 2 slides, please. Yeah, this is the proposed elevations and plan. You see that it forms a garage, and also there's a storeroom at the back as well. So it'd be 9 metres long, just over about 3 metres wide. Next slide. So there you can see the tree constraints plan and the root protection zone of the smaller tree on which the garage will be situated. So the application suggests that about 25% of the root protection area of this tree, which is a white beam about 6 metres high, would be affected by the positioning of the garage, and that in effect this would shorten the life of the tree. The tree is protected because it's in the conservation area, but also protected as part of a tree protection plan under the planning permission for the dwelling. Next slide. So this is a photograph of the site during the construction of the dwelling, and you might just be able to see that there's a shipping container positioned just behind the white fencing there, which was there temporarily as part of the construction works, and that's roughly the location where the garage is proposed. Next slide. This is the site as now constructed with the wider entrance point, the double gate, and the brick piers. And you can see there is a bit of a space between the highway and the gates, where a vehicle can pull off the highway and open the gates to get into the property. Next slide. There's just another view of the property in relation to the highway. And a view from the opposite direction. So the main concerns or issues here are in relation to the impact on the protected tree, and also the impact on access to and from the property. You'll see from the report that we have an objection from, as well as the town council, we have an objection from the tree officer, who's concerned about the fact that the tree was protected, but the proposal would now impact upon that previously agreed protection. And concern as well from the tree officer that there is no capacity for any satisfactory compensation for the impact on the tree. You'll see also, though, in the report at 6.2.4 that the tree was identified in the tree report as a category C tree, which is of a tree of low quality and unlikely to merit a tree preservation order. So I would suggest that the importance is more of its value in terms of the amount of trees within the area rather than its individual importance. And the report does recognise that the tree contributes to the overall character of the area. The applicants are arboriculturalists suggest that the excavations in the root protection area of the tree are about 25%, and that this would cause, it's not expected that it would cause the tree to die, but its vitality will be significantly reduced. I think effectively what this means is that it would impact on the longevity of the tree in the longer term. In terms of access, there's an objection from the highways officer, who considers the position of the garage is likely to result in difficulties turning on site, and therefore the need for reversing manoeuvres on the public highway. Because members saw on site today, there's enough room within the site to drive into the site and turn within it and drive out in forward gear. However, if there was more than one car parked in the property, then this might be more difficult to do, and therefore the second car would have to carry out a reversing manoeuvre, either going in or coming out. The report does suggest, though, that there are other properties along Hazley Road where cars do need to reverse in or out, and it's not unusual for this to happen in a residential area. And officers consider that that this issue isn't so significant in this location to justify a refusal on highways grounds. So overall, officers come to the view that whilst there are issues with the proposed location of the garage, these aren't so significant that the permission should be refused on those grounds. Thank you.
Thank you, Calvin. So we now move to speakers. And I believe we have one speaker on this, which is Councillor Hilary.
Thank you, Chair. I'm pretty neutral on this, but I have got concerns. It is a busy road and there is a lot of new residential properties built up and down that road, and the amount of traffic going up and down, and the likelihood of cars reversing out on there does cause me some concern. It is a 4-bedroomed property, so although they may only have one car at the moment, there is a possibility that there could be more than one car in the future. So that's really what I wanted just to say is if you could just consider that when you're looking at when you discuss it, please. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I will open this to debate by members. Councillor Harting.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, this was a very interesting site this morning we had a look at. We had an opportunity to go inside and have a really good look around and see the sort of issues that have been pointed out in the report in terms of lack of space for manoeuvring with the plan as it currently exists. It does appear on site that with a slightly different design, however, there may be opportunities for potentially carrying out a turning manoeuvre within the property. The garage itself is quite long and has a storage space at the rear of it, and so I think perhaps without storage space and perhaps with a slightly reduced size of the garage, there would appear to be enough space to carry out turning. And I'm just wondering whether or not it might be an opportunity that we might want to consider. We did have a discussion with the applicants on site who seem to be recognising that there is an issue. We just recently purchased the property. I just wonder whether it might be worthwhile, or I don't really want to refuse it just because we have the objections that we have, but I think it might perhaps be helpful if we deferred it for some further discussions with the owner, who's very recently moved in. So I propose that I'll put that on the table to see whether it is supported that we defer it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Marshall.
Thank you. A couple of concerns for me on this really. The planning permission for the new dwelling was passed without any mention of a garage. The garage has then gone in afterwards. I'm throwing a lot of weight here on the council's tree and woodland amenity protection report and their objection. With the siting of the garage, it's going to actually take out the root protection area of the tree, and it's agreed that that's going to limit the lifespan of that tree. And albeit it may only be a class 3 tree, which wouldn't give itself a protection order, it is within keeping in the area. And there is, as it says in 4.1.5, under CS6 of the core strategy policy, there's no compensation for taking that tree out with any other improvements around with the greenery, etc. of the area. I'm also looking at what Councillor Luff was saying. I think from a highways perspective and safety perspective, the more we can minimise traffic having to reverse onto a carriageway, we need to look at that in any new applications and planning. Now, with the dwelling as it is has been passed, we don't need to reverse onto the highway. So the determining factor on that is the garage going in place. So at the moment, unless I hear something differently, I could not support this application.
Thank you. Councillor Tindall.
Yes, could I ask, I tried to find it, but is this part of the conservation area?
Yes.
Sorry, that's probably obvious in church. So is it not protected anyway? As if it doesn't need to have a TPO on it because it's protected by virtue of the Conservation Area Act.
It is protected because it's within the conservation area, but also it's protected further because under the planning permission there's a tree retention scheme, and this is included in the tree retention scheme.
Thanks very much. Oh, I missed that, but
Okay, thank you. Any of the members want to make comments, ask questions of the officers? Yes, councillor Bowden.
Thank you. I echo what some of the other members have said about the dangers of reversing out onto the road. I think that is certainly a concern. I think also, though, this is a large building. This is 9 metres long, which, given that it's quite close to the gate of the property and therefore, you know, well visible from the road, I think that's something else that we need to consider. I feel that possibly, you know, with taking that into account and the fact that the tree will quite possibly suffer as a result of this, and the concerns about the parking issues, I find it difficult to agree to this.
Thank you. I'll go back to councillor Marshall.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I haven't heard anything to change my mind on this at all. So I am going to put a proposal forward that we reject the application. The reasoning that we are going to, or I propose that we reject, is under the fact that the tree will be damaged in a conservation area. It doesn't need to have a TPO. It is protected by the conservation area anyway. And with the removal of the tree, which is admitted into that, the guidance under core strategy CS6 and the SAMDEV MD2 and MD12 is not covered with any compensation for the area. Those are the grounds that I'm proposing we reject.
Councillor Parsons.
Yeah, I think I'd like to support the proposal brought by Councillor Harding, that rather than rejecting this at this stage, that we take further discussions with the applicants in order to possibly amend this current application to something that will better fit in terms of both the traffic issues and the tree issue, whether there is potentially something there that can be done that will both satisfy the applicant but also make sure that we don't have issues with the trees and the reversing onto the road. So I'd be prepared to second deferring this application.
Thank you. Just to be clear, councillor, did you put that in as a proposal, or you were suggesting that you would look?
Yes, I put it on the table, hoping for a second, but
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was a proposal. Yeah, officer.
I just want to add, this is the first application. If you're mindful to refuse the application today, they would have a free go as a result of the refusal. I see the application's been in for some time. I'm only conscious of our new assistant director and new ways of working.
Yeah. Just come back on that one.
Yeah, councillor Clinton.
I entirely accept what you're saying about the new policies to speed things along, but I think surely the committee still reserves the right to suggest deferment if there's something that could be resolved rather than just an outright refusal.
Can I just come back to him? One of the reasons I put in the deferral forward was it became clear when we were on site that the people who have now recently just purchased the property weren't the original people who put in the application, so they weren't responsible, if you like, for the original plan, and they seem quite amenable to having further discussions to try and see if they could solve the issues with the reversals into the roadway and so on. So that was why my view was perhaps there's an opportunity for us just to go back and say, well, look, you know, there are some issues. And can we resolve them satisfactorily first?
Officer,
Can we just go back to the block plan, please? I was just going to say, we saw on site that it's quite a long garage. It includes obviously the storeroom at the back. It's 9 metres long. It includes a storeroom and a garage. I think there is scope there to shorten it, and I got the impression today at site that the property owners were amenable to some alterations being put forward to the design. I don't think you will overcome the tree issue, because I think the purpose of reducing its length will be to set it back further into the site to improve the access, and also probably lessen its visual impact as well from the roadside. But it wouldn't overcome the fact that it will be built within the root protection zone of the tree. But that's certainly something, one avenue that we could go down with the applicant to maybe alter the size of it.
yeah, if I could be Councillor Parsons, I would just like to make a couple of comments myself, because I went on the site visit this morning, and to me this seems like a classic case of they put a planning application in for a large 4-bedroom house, and either forgotten or not thought they would be able to fit in a garage somewhere on that site as well. It's partly, well, it's mainly due to the tree protection areas along that left-hand side as you go in the drive. But speaking to the applicants this morning, they mentioned that there is no storage for any garden machinery or any outside tools at all. They have to store them in fact, they said they've got them stored in a container somewhere at the moment. And it just seems to me a case of you build a house and then say, oh, hang on, we haven't got a garage, or we haven't got an outside store. And I think there is a possibility of perhaps further discussions to reduce this in size, particularly as was mentioned that the applicants weren't the ones that put in the application. So I am concerned about the tree protection area, the root protection area as well. Now, Councillor Tindall, do you want to speak?
No, I think.
No, you didn't. Councillor, sorry, it was Councillor Parsons next, then Councillor Marshall. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the map that we see there, if the length of that building was half the size, because the storage area wasn't part of it and it was simply a garage, and if the garage moved slightly further north towards the gates, it may be that we could do something that would not affect the tree, and that the cars could still come in and around and have a larger turning area, because that building would be much shorter. I mean, I just wonder whether it is worth deferring to take a look at that.
Councillor Marshall.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. After listening to what everybody said, I am prepared to support the deferment, and therefore at the moment I will withdraw my proposal for rejection. I will say though, if it does come back in front of committee and there is no compensation for the destruction of that tree that's been there for a long period of time, and its life will be shortened, I will then be proposing for a further rejection on it. So at the moment I will support the deferment.
Thank you. So we have a proposer and a seconder for deferring this. Do you want to quantify any statements on that deferment? Would you want the deferment to come back to this committee, or would you be happy for officers to make the decision?
I think officers have heard the views from the committee have been quite clear in terms of what Councillor Marshall said and others have said. So myself, when we've been on site, we've seen what's required. I mean, obviously, if the discussions don't bear fruit in terms of the discussions we've had today, then I think it needs to come back before committee. But if they do, then I don't see any reason for it to need to come back.
Officers, yeah.
We'd be happy to go back to the applicant and seek changes. I think Councillor Parsons was perhaps suggesting that the garage should be moved towards the access, but then there was another indication that it might be best if it was moved away from the access to provide a little bit more manoeuvrability with vehicles. So I think officers would need to know what we're trying to negotiate first.
Yeah, because I think from my point of view and from the site visit, And looking at the block plan there wasn't any way that that garage or building as it's proposed now could be moved any nearer to the access. You wouldn't actually be able to get a vehicle in and manoeuvre them and get it into the garage. So if it was changed and was just a store, wasn't a garage included, then that would be fine. But that's for discussions with the applicant, I would suggest. So do you want clarification of what the deferment is for, the reason for deferment?
Yes, well, I think it would have to be to see whether we can reduce the size of the garage in order not only to see if we can solve one of the objections in terms of highways, which is the reversal onto the highway issue, but also to see whether, as part of that, see whether we can get in place a sufficient turning area, which would resolve the need for any reversal. I don't think there is any way that we can really resolve the tree routing issue, because you can't push it any further back, because you're then impacting on the routing area for the much larger and much more significant tree that's behind it, and probably Class A or Class B, I should imagine. So I think that's where I'm coming from.
Councillor Tim.
Yes, I didn't come on the site visit, but I'm quite prepared to accept all the other councillors' comments. In priority, I think getting the access correct and the ability not to have to reverse onto what Hilary Love said was quite a busy road. I think that's probably the prime objective from my point of view. And I'm not belittling the hope that the tree will survive. I'm not suggesting that for a moment, but if I'm understanding Kelvin correctly, you really want a clear steer of those two aims is the one that, have I got that right?
Yeah. Okay, so officers, Kim, are you happy with the reasons given for the deferment? Yeah. Okay, so in that case, I'm happy to go for the vote.
Okay, so we've got a proposal for deferral to come to some agreement in relation to the issue with the reversing on the highway and size of the garage to allow turning on site. If you could indicate whether you're for or against the proposal, please. Caroline Bagnall? For. Andy Bartington? For. Nigel Harton?
For.
Christian Lee?
For.
Richard Marshall?
For.
Tony Parsons?
For.
Robert Tyndall?
For.
And Nick Hignett?
For.
Okay, so that's unanimous.
Try to go and rescue the two councillors waiting in a horrible. I can also take the opportunity for my usual.
Yeah, it was I don't know, what have you haven't seen? Our council had their kids, you reading them out, or what are we doing? No, they've been emailed, but have they had a chance to look at them, maybe on site? Well, if we draw attention to them, they got like, well, Robert's still out, he did. Well, they can look if they email that. Is that all you played? Is that all you played?
We're just waiting for Councillor Tyndall to come back in.
Chairman.
Thank you. Right, we go to item number 7, which is a plough house at Little Worthing, Shrewsbury. Bill, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Right, this application proposes a replacement dwelling and installation of a packaged treatment plant at Plough House Farm at Worthing. Before I go on to presentation, I must emphasise, although the description of development is replacement dwelling, the application, I must make clear, proposes to retain the existing dwelling for reasons I'll go through during the presentation. There are no updates on the update sheet. However, this morning we have received comments from the local member, Councillor Heather Kidd. I'm conscious that you've been on your site visit. They have been circulated around to you, but if you haven't had a chance to, I'll run through what she says, and I think it's best because they were too late to go as we only received them this morning. However, to be fair, she did indicate to me earlier in the week that she intended to comment on this application. So I think the best thing I do is I read them out to you. Dear committee members, this should held to policy as a replacement dwelling. This would mean the demolition of the existing farmhouse. I ask the committee to uphold this policy. It may well be used in future as a reason to keep buildings which are then later developed. In this case, the existing building will require a huge amount of work to make it stable and safe. It blocks visibility on the road. The bats can be provided with alternative accommodation. There are numerous examples of this happening where rare bats, not least the house development Kerry Vale Vine Yard, there are other buildings there. It will take a large amount of money to upkeep to maintain it as safe and indeed as a bat's house. I consider this as the thin edge of the wedge, with a near derelict building being kept and improved and which may be used as a precedent in the future. I urge the committee to turn this down. I have no objection to a replacement dwelling. The only comment I wish to make on that now, I advise members, we have to look at the application as what's before us. We can't anticipate what may happen in the future. Right, the application is recommended for approval by officers subject to conditions as set out in Appendix 1, attached to this report. I need to bring to members' attention the wording of condition number 10, which refers to the existing dwelling, the one proposed to be used as a bat house, which is to be used only in connection to the replacement dwelling as ancillary to the enjoyment of the proposed new build dwelling. Members may consider this matter is better controlled via a Section 106 agreement with consideration to the fact that this building is presently lawful dwelling house in its own right. Now, I need to explain the difference between a condition and the Section 106. The condition will control it via the usual way in condition. It is within the red line. However, it is a separate dwelling, being a separate dwelling, and you'll see in the slides as I progress through that it can only be called ancillary in scale and size. It's a large dwelling on right hand side of the road. A Section 106 would control it for 5 years, in that it would be ancillary if they were to, for example, unlawfully be residing in it and it wasn't brought to our attention or we were unaware. So it'd be a stronger agreement. However, it's not foolproof. Either way, they could either apply to vary the condition if you're mindful to grant it, or remove the condition, or secondly, after 5 years, if we didn't agree within the first 5 years, they could apply to vary the Section 106. And the final thing I need to emphasise, the NPPF, which is obviously National Planning Policy, does allow subdivision of dwellings in the countryside. So it's an evenly balanced thing. It's even caused quite a debate amongst officers as to which way to go. The case officer, I've discussed it with him, and he tells me that if you were mindful to approve, he would be more comfortable with a section 106 agreement. So from officers, that's an amendment to the recommendation. It's subject to the conditions as set out in Appendix 1 and signing of Section 106 agreement. But like I said, I've left it to you to debate because it's an evenly balanced matter. Right, run through the slides now. First, the application site is outlined in red, with other land in the applicant's control outlined in blue. Site is visually in open countryside. However, the area known as Little Worthing forms part of a community cluster where development by infilling and conversions may be considered acceptable and suitable sites. There's more on this outlined in paragraph 6.11 of the officer's report. You'll see this on the block plan there in front of you. It's the road leading from Worthing towards Shrewsbury, and it's on the side of the road. The dwelling is right up against the road. You'll see there's an outline planning approval granted for 2 dwellings to the north of the site. And the access to the 2 existing dwellings is further up the road. That's recently been, or is currently under construction, as I only drove past it later this morning. And the access is proposed to serve the 2 new build dwellings, which are be granted in outline, and the proposed dwelling subject to this application, which is set to the rear of the buildings alongside the road. The nearest building to outline approval is the dwelling itself, and alongside that is a brick-built farm building. The rear of the site is rather overgrown, and it would be correct to say that it's a house that hasn't had any improvements or refurbishment done for a considerable amount of time. I'm led to understand it hasn't been resided in since 2009. However, as the photographs at the end of the presentation will indicate, it clearly is still considered suitable for residential use. In fact, I believe there's been 2 photographs of the internal arrangements showing the contents of the house inside. Next slide, please. That is the proposed block plan with the dwelling situated to the rear at the bottom there. And I pointed out to you the public highway which runs past the front of the site, and I must emphasise there's no objections to the application from the Shropshire Council Highways. Next slide, please. That's the existing dwellings elevations, which is up against the public highway. I've got a photograph to show you of that later in the presentation. Next slide. This is the proposed new dwellings elevations. It is substantially larger at about 60% approximately, I believe, floor space over 2 floors. Next slide. That's the rear elevation. Sorry, is that the rear elevation or is that the front elevation? I think that's the front elevation by the looks. Can you go back one, please?
Rear elevation.
It is. Well, what fooled me there was that car park outside the garage. Can you just check with the previous one, please?
Yeah, that's the front.
Yeah, it's got a car outside, isn't it?
Yeah,
Is it a carport? Is it? Right. Okay. Right. Fair enough. The next slide, please. Right. Internal arrangements on the ground floor. Next slide, please. The first floor. I believe there's 4 bedrooms, an ensuite plus a very large bathroom on the end of the dwelling. Next slide, please. That's an aerial view of the site. The brick building alongside it, traditional farm building, and the other traditional farm buildings to the rear of that, including a Dutch barn to the rear. As I've said, it's overgrown, and it's certainly not lived in presently, the dwellings, and I understand, like I said, it's 2009. Next slide. That's the roadside view of the dwelling up against the highway. and the brick built building alongside I was talking about earlier. Next slide, please. A closer view of the house. I must point out that with the house being so close to the highway, obviously there would be concerns about its maintenance, because even though it's not been it's been claimed it's unviable for conversion. But I'll touch on that later, but it's just a point I want to raise to you now while looking at the two photographs. Next slide, please. That's the internal arrangements. As you can see, there's domestic paraphernalia scattered around.
That's a very polite way.
Next slide, please. That's from the taken from the side of the site, looking westwards. Next slide. Rear of the site. Next slide. So there's significant vegetation there, ideal habitat for bats. Any others? Yeah, yeah, that's the last one. Right, the applicants, as I've said, have submitted a refurbishment cost list in support of their application, which I have a copy of here in front of me, and I don't dispute what they're saying in the report. They're claiming it's unviable to convert or to refurbish. The dwelling is considered a non-designated heritage asset. However, they've included structural repairs as part of the works required. Well, they will be required in any case to retain the house for retention of the bats. I've also, I need to point out, they have included expenses such as new central heating, new bathrooms and kitchens and internal. Well, a lot of that would be necessary in many a house much younger than this, including my own, which is only about 20 years old. As I've said, there are no objections from a highways perspective. The parish council's objections are outlined in paragraph 4.113 of the report and are acknowledged and further discussed in the officer's report. I also wish to point out that while the application, as I've pointed out, it proposes to retain the existing dwelling as a bat house, it must be made clear that this is what the application proposed. It was not a request from our ecology in consultation in relation to the application. Any proposal for the dwelling's demolition would require a licence from Natural England and compensation for loss of any existing bat habitat. This is also referenced in the report in section 6.6. In conclusion, this is considered a finely balanced application in that the proposal for a replacement dwelling is acceptable in principle. This is outlined in the conclusion of the officer's report, albeit that the existing dwelling is considered a non-designated heritage asset. However, it is also recognised that to retain the existing dwelling as a bat house and ancillary to the proposed dwelling, certain structural maintenance will be required to the existing dwelling, and certainly in relation to its close proximity to the public highway. As I've said, it is not a condition of any recommendation that by Shropshire Council's ecology team that it is retained as a bat house. On balance, officers consider the recommendation to be one of approval, subject to conditions as outlined in Appendix 1, attached report, and the signing of Section 106 agreement if members consider that owing to the existing dwelling's planning history and current planning status, the condition number 10 as attached in Appendix 1 and its ancillary use is not considered robust enough in order to control its future use as ancillary accommodation to the proposed dwelling. And as I pointed out earlier, the NPPF allows subdivision of existing dwellings in the open countryside to more than one dwelling, and that is set out in paragraph 80, part D of the policy framework. That concludes my presentation on this application, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. We've got no speakers on this. We've all heard the comments from Councillor Kidd, and you've seen the objections from the parish council. Councillor Boddington, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd be more comfortable with this if they were going to knock the older house down. And they said, well, it's not fit for purpose. We should take it away and put a new house in. What we're getting here is a rather uncomfortable hybrid, where we have a new building and an old building, which I don't know, I'm not a structural surveyor, I haven't been to see it, that could be brought back into use, particularly in a village like Worthing, where older properties catch a premium and people like to do up villages, do up houses in our villages. So I feel rather uncomfortable with this proposal. And retaining it as a bat house, well, as Philip said, it still has to be maintained. It's an unlisted heritage asset, and they can't just allow it to fall down. It doesn't strike me as a viable proposal. And I do feel distinctly uncomfortable with it.
Thank you, Councillor Boddington. Councillor Aiken, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just echo that. My main concern is the conservation comment that was put in the report. It says that that is possibly in a poor structural condition. I'm not a structural engineer either. Without any regular maintenance, it's definitely going to deteriorate further and could actually become dangerous. And that's what they say in their report. I'm just concerned that, as Councillor Boddington says, about the viability of this. I don't understand why you would keep a large building like that as a bat race. And I'm all for ecology and looking after bats, but as Councillor Kidd said, there are ways that the bats could be encouraged to live somewhere else. Let's put it that way. And I just think it's completely unviable to leave a large property like that right on the edge of a highway and not demolish it when eventually, unless it is changed into living accommodation, eventually it's going to have to be demolished anyway, because it's not going to stay structurally sound for year after year after year unless regular maintenance is used.
Thank you, Councillor Hart, please.
Yeah, I've sort of got similar concerns over this. I'm quite surprised. I think I've ever come across the proposals to make a property of that size into a bat house. It's just quite bizarre. I think it does look in quite poor condition. I said, like everybody else, I'm not a structural engineer. It might take some effort to bring it back into use, but you may not even want to, given its position being right on the roadway line. So I'm very uncomfortable with this application as it currently stands. I don't think I'm liable to support it.
Councillor Marshall, please.
Thank you, Chair. All I can say is I'm really glad that this wasn't the first ever application I looked at on the planning committee. Because I sat here for the first 5 minutes totally confused, and then I finally figured it out by listening to Philip and having a look, that we're talking about building a new house on the site, plus retaining an extensive building to house the bats in. I agree with everybody, really. It's bad enough having the upkeep of a new house, let alone having to have the regular maintenance on the other building to house the bats and have it as a bat roost, when there are ways, and I agree with Councillor Hignett, we've got to look after the bats, but there are ways that we could move them. There's no way I could support this, and as I say, I'm glad it's not my first ever application.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Anybody? Councillor Baden, please.
Thank you. I think I would echo what my colleagues have said about how unusual this application is. But I think something else to consider is the fact that this is going to, the new property is going to be quite substantial and clearly expensive. And who is going to want to purchase a property of that nature with an enormous derelict house basically at the front of their property? It's going to detract from the new property. It's going to potentially be dangerous. Any family living there with children are going to have to take measures to prevent them getting inside the derelict building. I find this a very strange application.
Thank you. Come back to
Calvin just reminded me, it's not just a bat house, it's part of the answer, it's ancillary, it is, there'll be nothing stopping them at a later date, say they want to have a office accommodation in there or anything, but I hear what you're saying so far, and I'm just happy to carry on listening to what the others are going to say, because I agree, it's one I haven't come across before, that's all I can say.
They should advertise the replacement dwelling. What's the problem knocking the old dwelling down and putting in the new dwelling just further back up the highway?
That's too obvious.
Yeah.
Well, a replacement dwelling would be to take the old one down and set the new one further back up the highway. Like, there's be a problem with that.
I agree to.
Why don't we need to keep it? Yeah. Andrew, do you want to speak again? Yeah. Right, is anybody going to put their head above the parapet and give me a recommendation for approve or Councillor Boddington, please?
I propose that we go against the officer recommendation and refuse the application on the grounds that this is not a clear scheme for viable development of the property because of the retention of an existing unlisted heritage asset that is in a state of decay.
Thank you. No, second. Okay. Councillor Tindall.
What I'm going to suggest is that you could refuse it, if you're minded to refuse it, is that it's unclear with the information submitted as to how you can support the application, because you're quite right, the dwelling is up against the highway. There is the issue with future maintenance of that, and I would say based on the information for restatement and overall refurbishment, which the applicants have argued makes it unviable. However, this flies in the face when they want to retain it for bats, therefore, and as ancillary accommodation to the dwelling. Therefore, everything listed in this list here doesn't stack up with the costs to refurbish it.
Can we come back into the on that, please?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think how to combine the two, really.
Yeah, well, sorry, could I ask, Chairman?
Yeah.
Is Heather Kidd, who's the local councillor, is she in favour of refusing this? Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
Yes.
Yes.
She is, yes, thank you.
Yes, she stated, yes, she is. Although she has no, her comments say she has no objection to a replacement dwelling, but she urges you to turn this application down. And that's the word she's used.
Councillor Boddington, please.
So I'll try again on the reasons that there is insufficient information on how an unlisted heritage asset can be maintained in this plan, and how the new building and the heritage building will work alongside each other. No, that's not particularly good, it's a bit clunky. I'm sure we can prove it.
Councillor, please.
Thank you. Is it at all possible for us to give permission for the new build, but also have the demolition of the?
No.
We can't do that.
No, I've been the application.
Councillor Tindall.
Can I just say that you personally put it very well a few minutes ago when I think you said if we all want to get an agreement, so you said who would want to keep that house and have expensive building a new one when you could
demolish your existing one and build a new one further back from the island.
That's exactly what you said,
Yeah.
yes. Does that help then? Or not?
I could suggest, another thing I could suggest is that you don't consider it necessary to retain the existing, if you accepted the principle of a replacement dwelling on site, the policy does say it should be built within the curtilage of an existing dwelling. So you could argue if they're having a replacement dwelling here, they cannot retain the existing one, and that there's other legislation, that covers enhancement for bats On site, I've showed you during the presentation, there's a number of farm buildings to the one side.
Yes.
There's trees there, so in my opinion, there's adequate mitigation possibilities for the back colony that's in the house. And like I said, they'd have to apply for further, they'd have to do further surveys. But in my opinion, there is legislation that could address the concerns with the bats.
Councillor Bollington? Councillor Egan?
I'm less concerned about the vats, rather than if we go down that route, we would be saying you can demolish an unlisted heritage asset. And that's quite awkward with planning guidance on heritage assets. So, you know, I still don't think we quite have it right. I don't know what is right, but I don't think that's still quite right.
Yeah, well, you could, in response to that, if you feel that the dwelling is capable of conversion or refurbishment rather, which they have admitted by agreeing to keep it as a bat house, that you're not convinced that there's enough information being to demonstrate demolition of the existing dwelling. But then secondly, another strand to this is the policy indicates replacement dwellings will be similar in scale and size. Well, this application is proposing to double the size of the residential dwelling on site because the proposed dwelling is approximately 60% bigger than existing. Plus the fact they're going to have this dwelling, even though the bats are going to be living in it, they're going to have it as ancillary. So that will be included with the dwelling size. So it doesn't comply with policy on replacement dwellings from that point of view. I need to be careful how I put this because I'm also trying to defend the officer's recommendation, but to be fair to the officer, he's made very clear in his report that it is finely balanced.
Councillor Egan, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make a couple of points on the viability of trying to maintain and look after the existing building on site. One, it's right on the edge of the highway, so therefore any maintenance work involving the frontage onto the highway would need a road closure, which is going to be quite expensive. And secondly, if you're trying to maintain it purely as a building for bat roast or maybe for ancillary use later on, how can you carry out work on that building if you've got, I think in the report, 27 bats at least roosting in there? Doesn't that lead to limitations on what work you're allowed to do on that building anyway?
Just need Councillor Bollington a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
Finish your essay.
It's not going to be next week.
No.
So to pick up the main points, the proposed building is of an excessive size for a replacement dwelling and also leaves the future of the unlisted heritage asset uncertain. And we can fill the policies around that. I'm sure officers could fill the policies around that for us.
Yes. I think we can put the policies out. I think one of the strongest situations here, if you're mindful and confused, is the fact that it doesn't strictly comply with the replacement dwelling policy on scale and size.
So,
Councillor Bollington, you're all right with that? It doesn't
I'm happy with that.
conform with
Yep.
replacement dwelling on scale and size.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Okay, that's your proposal.
That's my proposal.
Okay, seconded by Councillor Tyndall.
Yeah, I think it was.
Okay, all those in favour of that proposal, please.
We have to do this.
Take names, yeah.
No,
Right, okay, so we've got a proposal to refuse the application for the reasons said, that the new dwelling would be excessive size for a replacement dwelling in the countryside. If you could indicate whether you're going to be voting for or against the proposal, please. Caroline Bagnall?
For.
Andy Boddington?
For.
Nigel Houghton?
For.
Nick Hicknick?
For.
Christian Lee?
For.
Hilary Love? For. Richard Marshall?
For.
Tony Parsons?
For.
Robert Tyndall?
For.
And David Evans?
For.
Okay, so that's unanimously refused.
Actually, that's a good idea. Now, come on to item number 8, which I hand the chair over to councillor Ignis, please.
Thank you, Chair. So we have item 8, which is proposed footbridge north of Newington, Creighton Arms. And so I hand over to officer to give their presentation.
Thank you. This is an application for prior approval under the permitted development order for the construction of a footbridge to the north of Craven Arms. And rather a couple of
Rather struggling, the drills and things.
Yes, show that bit.
there are try and time in between the two. There are a couple of additional letters that they received which have been circulated yesterday. One was from Network Rail, and I'm assuming that members have read those two representations. In particular, in relation to the Network Rail letter, I'll draw your attention to the fact that in the letter they have said that they have been made aware of your authority's aspirations and ongoing application for government levelling up funds for the inclusion of a roundabout on the A49 and road bridge over the railway. We acknowledge this is a very positive step forward and will continue to offer support where required. If such a project were to be delivered, we would welcome an opportunity to reassess the requirement of the footbridge, and should you wish to include temporary time restrictive condition on this proposal subject to road improvements, then they'll be happy to discuss that option. The second representation is one from the Ramblers, who are generally supportive of the footbridge, but wish to be involved in any further discussions in relation to footpath diversions and the like. First slide, please. So this is not a planning an application for planning permission. It's an application for prior approval, and it's important, I think, just to stress that there are only limited reasons why we can refuse to grant prior approval for the road bridge, for the footbridge, and these are set out in 6.1.4 of the report. And those two reasons are that we should not refuse prior approval unless we are satisfied that the development ought to be and could reasonably be carried out elsewhere on the land, or the design or external appearance of any building, bridge, etc. would injure the amenity of the neighbourhood and is reasonably capable of modification to avoid such injury. So those are the only two grounds that we can refuse approval to Network Rail for the footbridge. So the location is as shown on this plan. It is a footbridge which would span 3 lines on the railway and link into a public right of way either side of the railway to the west and to the east. Next slide. This is the one of the designs and drawings of the footbridge. It's a fairly modern design, which you'll see from later visualizations. Next slide. So it would be approximately 7.5 meters to the top of the parapet, the highest point. Next slide. So this is a photograph provided by Network Rail of the bridge prototype under construction. Next slide. And these are visualizations of the look of the bridge in position at this site. You can see on the top one that To the right hand side of that photograph, you can see where the footpath comes away from the small area of woodland to the right. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. And here you can see how it fits in with the existing rights of way that's going north, west to south east and across the railway line. At the moment, it's an open crossing, so to gain access from one side to the other, you're reliant on using your eyes and ears to see whether a train is coming. And this footbridge will clearly reduce the risk of accident with that. And the Network Rail have said that this particular level crossing carries the highest risk of any footpath level crossing within the Wales and Borders route. So in terms of the main issues then, the first one is whether or not this development ought to be and could reasonably be carried out elsewhere on the land. Clearly, the reason that Network Rail have proposed this particular location is that it does connect in with the footpaths, and the purpose of it is to improve safety for footpath users. So to move it elsewhere on the land would negate that primary purpose of this particular position. That would involve a diversion of the footpath to a link into wherever the footbridge was being positioned elsewhere on their land. In summary then, officers are of the opinion that this is the most appropriate and optimal location for this particular footbridge, purely because of the relationship of the bridge to the existing rights of way. On to the second reason that members could refuse this application on, it's whether the design or external appearance of the bridge would injure the amenity of the neighbourhood and is reasonably capable of modification to avoid such injury. You've seen the visualisations, and you've seen that it's a fairly modern style of bridge. As I say, it's a prototype bridge design that Network Rail have been developing, and they would like to roll out to future locations. We're told that it uses more sustainable materials, it's quicker to erect and easier to erect, and cheaper to erect as well, and also easier to dismantle if needs be. In terms of whether or not it would injure the amenity of the neighbourhood, you'll see on this plan that it is fairly close to the built-up edge of Craven Arms to the south. And also the areas in pink are areas which have been allocated for employment use in the existing development plan and are proposed to be carried forward as allocated land in the draft local plan as well. So subject to planning permission being granted for those allocated areas, this part of Craven Arms is expected to be developed further in due course, and therefore the bridge would not be it would not be such an isolated structure. Officers are of the opinion that in terms of its location and appearance, it forms part of railway infrastructure. There are other elements of railway infrastructure at this part of the line as well, so it wouldn't look completely out of place in this particular position. It would be likely to be visible from the AONB, which is approximately 800 metres away to the northwest. But at that distance, I think it would generally be of limited visibility, and also there'd be trees and hedgerows which would provide some level of screening, certainly the lower parts of the bridge. So overall, in terms of those two limited reasons why we could refuse this proposal for prior approval, officers are happy with what has been put forward in terms of its location and its appearance, and therefore the recommendation is that we do grant prior approval. Thank you.
Chairman, could I ask that a slide showing the design of the bridge are put on the screen? Yes, thank you. That's fine. It's just while we were discussing it, I think it's perhaps one of two reasons why we might refuse it. Thank you.
Okay. Right, so thank you. We now go to speakers. First speaker is councillor Meadows for the parish council. And you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. Thank you, councillors and committee members. Thank you for letting me speak on behalf of the Westminster Parish Council. I just want to give you a little bit of background to this, because it's been sort of bubbling away in the background for a while. Network Rail first approached the Parish Council in June 2021 about the proposed footbridge, and they were very clear they wanted to have local consultation and were keen to listen to our views, which we welcomed. They've since held consultations with the Parish Council, the Craven Arms Town Council, because this is very close to Craven Arms, and last week they held a drop-in session for local residents. The Westminster Parish Council, Craven Arms Town Council, and our local MP, Philip Dunn, have all voiced very strong objections and would not like to see the footbridge get approval. But Network Rail seem quite insistent on proceeding. I think it's very fair to say that as a parish council, we recognise the safety concerns which are in their report and fully support their aims of increasing safety on the railway. However, it should be noted that the footpath crossing in question has been shut for 5 years. It was shut by Network Rail in 2017 on safety concerns, and it has been diverted over the level crossing on Long Lane since that time. And during these 5 years, neither the Westminster Parish Council nor I understand the Craven Arms Town Council have had a single representation from the public asking us to reopen it. So I think that's an important background piece, whereas we do get on other crossing areas that are seen as more dangerous. Network Rail have also argued that a permanent diversion instead of a footbridge is difficult to achieve. They say it would be very difficult to achieve, when in fact, actually, we're aware that there was a crossing over the railway about 500 metres further on by Jewson's, those of you who know the area, yes, which was granted in 2018, where they successfully rediverted a railway crossing along the A49 and up the lane towards Cheney-Longford House, and got approval from the local landowner to cross his land. So there is a precedent. So we're trying to understand why it wouldn't work in this occasion. And that diversion takes pedestrians along the A49, as I say, a more major trunk road. So while I fully recognise what the auditor said, that the committee can only object on 2 very specific reasons, we want you to be aware that the Network Rail don't have local support for this. The crossing has been shut for 5 years. There are alternative diversion routes which have been in place, and we're not aware of any demands from walkers for this to be reopened. Now, in terms of your deliberations, the key point to note is the proposed bridge is simply not appropriate for this location. The design is very modern, as you can see. I actually personally like the design. I think in certain places in the country it would